You might remember this from a previous video. I made a clamp that holds things horizontally down to my drill press table. It works fantastic, but it does not do vertical projects. In the past, I've used a couple 2x4s, planed, jointed, and cut on the table saw as a makeshift vertical jig. It doesn't do too bad, but it doesn't clamp down to my table. And if you've ever done any vertical drilling with your drill press, you know that you want to keep things tied down to the table as much as you can for accurate drilling. Now we're going to start this jig off by making the bottom of the jig the same size as the drill press table. Now we'll set our lines for our tracks. I made the center about 2 inches. It's about 4 inches on the sides. We'll bring it over to the miter saw. Of course you could use a table saw. And we'll cut it to length. Because it's aluminum, I'm not worried about it damaging my blade. We'll drill out the holes on our drill press, making sure to countersink everything so that when we put the wood screws in to hold the tracks down to the jig, the top of the screws will be flush with the track. It's absolutely critical that we do not bump into those screw heads when we're moving our jig around. We'll bring the tracks back over to our jig, we'll clamp it down, and we'll find the center of each hole. Before drilling out and screwing our tracks down. If you have my drill press clamp, this will be an important step for you. We'll drill out a hole that will eventually be a groove. The groove will allow this jig to slide in easily, allowing you to clamp the entire jig down tight. This jig has 2 layers. The layer we just worked on the bottom, and a top where we'll need to add plywood that'll meet up next to the tracks we installed. Remember, it is very important that the tracks and the added plywood are flush with each other. Once we've cut our pieces to match the bottom plate, we'll simply add a little glue, give each piece a little rubbins, and clamp it all down. Remember that our center section is the sacrificial plate, so yeah, don't glue that down. After it is dried, we'll go back and drill the previous hole we started, and finish the groove by heading over to the bandsaw. I really love how easy this is to quickly slide in and lock down. It just makes drilling things out so much faster. Let's do the fences now. We'll take 2 pieces of wood and cut them at about 6 inches. We'll take them to the table saw next and cut off a 45-degree angle. Both pieces will be used. The cut-off piece will simply be stacked on the intended cut piece and glued. I added a little salt to help keep the 2 pieces from sliding around, which is especially important when dealing with these angles. After that dried, I headed back to the bandsaw and cut the remaining pieces off of each fence panel. I cleaned up the sides of each fence panel, rounding corners enough so that they're not sharp. This project started off looking like this, but I decided to add a little flair, and this is what I came up with. This is, of course, purely cosmetic. I marked over 1 inch and 3/16 on both sides of each fence before clamping them between the 2 2x4s I showed you at the beginning of this video. Drilling from the bottom, flat side, I made 3/8 inch holes at the marks I made. When you drill these holes out, you really need to take your time, taking maybe 1/8 of an inch depth each time and cleaning out the hole. After drilling, I brought it back to the belt sander and cleaned the outside of the holes. I also took the clamp face and tapered it slightly so that the top angles out. This is incredibly important for the clamp to work. You'll notice that my tracks are slightly narrower than the holes on the fence panels. I did this so that the column on my drill press doesn't get in the way when doing wider boards, as well as keeping the knobs on the fence from bumping into the knob that holds the jig down. I covered the angle back over with masking tape to prevent it from getting dinged up with this next step, cutting the holes out and placing the fences back on the jig. Then I mark the angles of the bolts to the angle on the wood. This will allow me to cut the bolt exactly where it needs to be cut. You might have heard of a lock nut. Well, this is my version of a lock nut. If we cut into the nut and then attach it to a bolt, it'll give us clamping power on the bolt without damaging the threads. And by the way, instead of buying expensive bolts to go with my tracks, I simply use 5/16 inch toilet bolts. After I clamp down on the bolt, I cut about halfway through it. We'll need to do this to bend this bolt in order to allow the knob to sit on the 45-degree angle we created on our fence panels. Before we push the bolt through the block, we need to remove the thread that will be inside the block. I used a belt strip sander, but you can very easily use a file to get the same results. To bend this to where we need it to be, we'll first insert the bolt through the fence. Add a nut to the end of the bolt and use a pair of pliers or vice grips. Be sure to take it slowly, and again, make sure that it is through the fence first. With a little carpet tape, I added 150 grit sandpaper, but if I were going to do this all over again, I think I would have used 80 grit sandpaper. I haven't had any problems, but 80 would definitely give it a little bit more of a bite. You can buy these project knobs just about anywhere, but I prefer to make my own. If you want to learn how I make these, I have an Instructable in the description below. To use this, it's very simple. You'll line up the drill bit with the mark on your wood, press both clamps together at the bottom, and screw the knobs in. This creates a downward pressure that holds the wood down tight to the jig. If you want more information, such as sizes and more detailed step-by-step instructions, I have an Instructable that's pinned to the comments down below. Thank you for watching. If you like this, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more jigs and woodworking ideas, and hit that bell. I have a plethora of original jigs on my YouTube channel if you're interested in more of these types of videos. You can also follow me on Instagram at Make Things with Rob.